Great. So next up, we've got Michael Murray from the ICO speaking about age assurance for the Children's Code. Michael leads on policy development related to the Children's Code and on children's privacy engagement with online and digital services in the UK and internationally. Prior to joining the ICO, Michael has extensive experience working in senior legal advice roles in the charity and grant sectors. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, George. Well done for making it this far. I'm tired from a full day of keeping the brain active, so thank you for coming. Some of you might have seen Emily's presentation earlier today, or the Ofcom ICO presentation. So we touched on the Commissioner's opinion on age assurance there, and a bit on the code, but we'll just go in a bit more detail. Got 25 minutes. I'll try to keep this brief so we can look at time for questions. The code, Children's Code, has been in operation for about 4 years. It's about how long I've been at the ICO. I've been working on the Children's Code the whole time. It was the first of its kind, followed very quickly by my colleague Jenny and her fundamentals in Ireland, setting the bar for subsequent age-appropriate design codes internationally. It is a data protection code of practice that allows online services to understand how they can apply the principles of the UK GDPR in an online world to protect children within the online world and not to exclude them from it. A couple key elements about the code before we get into the Commissioner's opinion. It's for relevant information society services likely to be accessed by children, and we use the UNCRC definition of children as anybody under the age of 18. In the UK, for those of you who aren't from here, we've got a consent age of 13 as well. It's another one to be really aware of. And I could probably add to that definition, likely be accessed by children. A key additional phrase goes there: in significant numbers. Okay. So what we're looking at is a risk-based proportionate approach to protecting children online. Those of you who've seen Baroness Kidron this morning, we're not expecting services to be able to tell we're keeping every child off our service. That would involve a significant amount of risk to do that. So we're looking at if a significant number of children are on the service, then you're in scope of the code, and then you should be putting protections in place. We defined that significant in a separate bit of guidance in 2023. And it's a strange thing. Significant, when we think about it colloquially, means a lot, right? But if you look at significant in a legal perspective, it doesn't mean the same thing. Significant basically means it's more than insignificant, all right? So we're not going to define a number, because significant will depend on the size of the organization, the risk of the data process, and so on. So each organization, through the accountability principle, will have to come up with their own view of whether a significant number of children are on the site, and to define that view in the DPIA. Okay, so part of that accountability principle. The code itself has 15 interlinked standards of age-appropriate design for online services. These range from everything about when you're required to do a DPIA, how you apply the UNCRC best interest of the child framework to online services and to age assurance. And it goes into specifics into things like data sharing or geolocation. Standard 3 of the code focuses on age-appropriate application. It doesn't focus on age assurance. There's no standard in the code that says age assurance, because within that age-appropriate application, organizations have choices, and they can apply risk-based appropriate approach to those choices. So if they decide, oh, we're going to apply all the standards of the code to all our users, you probably don't need age assurance, because then everybody's privacy would be high by default, okay? It's when an organization decides we don't want to apply the standards of the code to all users that age assurance probably becomes part of the mitigation factors that they're thinking of to protect children online. So just to bear that in mind when we're talking about this age of the Children's Code. It is grounded in the UNCRC, and it's really important because the UNCRC balances children's rights. So we want children to be on these services, and we're not looking at age assurance to block children out. when it's in their best interest to have access to a service. So the ICO's commissioner at the time the code was put in place, Liz Denham, was quite clear that this is not to gate kids out of the internet, it is to provide them an age-appropriate experience when they're in it. So how do we do that? Even though the code is 15 standards, it's many pages long. Those of you who have downloaded it will see it's almost like a little book. We still get questions. What does that mean? Even though the code is designed to say, what does the GDPR mean when applied to kids, they still, what does that mean when we apply it in principle? So that's what we've been trying to do with creating additional guidance materials to help organizations identify how to put the code in place, and then also then how they can use the code to comply with the underlying data protection law. And that's a critical thing just to remind everybody of. When we're talking about the code, the ICO supervises the code. We're interested in how the people conform with the code, but when we see a breach of the code, we're looking at what breach of the underlying GDPR is occurring. Any sort of regulatory action is based on non-compliance with the standards or the articles of the GDPR. So bear that in mind, please. Okay, just very quickly, these are the 15 standards of the code. Not all of them apply in every circumstance. So some organizations might not have connected toys or devices, for example. So you don't have to apply all of them. Take a risk-based approach to each one. Standard 3, the language of Standard 3 is there, and that focuses on the risk-based approach to recognizing the individual users and ensure you effectively apply the standards of the code to child users. Either establish the age with a level of certainty that is appropriate to the risks to the rights and freedoms of the child that arise from the processing, or apply the standards of the code to all users. So that risk-based element is critical here. So we're not saying, for example, you need a highly effective age verification system for a BBC app to help kids learn how to count, where there's no data processed. That would be overkill. So that's not what we're here for. So we're looking at high-risk processing, and then the ICO website has a list of what we consider to be high-risk processing that's linked to EDPB considerations, and Jenny will probably talk about theirs later. So that's clear about what we consider high-risk processing. So things like profiling, things like use of biometrics or genetic processing. These are things that would be identified as high risk. So when the high risk is there, then the level of certainty that we're expecting from organizations for application of age assurance goes up. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so here's the sort of process we've got to. So the code came in 2020 with a 1-year transition period. Then it came into effect fully. We expected all organizations to be complying in September 2021. We got some pushback that the fact that there wasn't enough information about age assurance requirements in the code. So we created the initial version of the opinion on age assurance that was published in October that year. But we committed at the time to undertake a stakeholder review to improve our understanding of the technology that was on the market, to potentially update that opinion within a year. Unfortunately, we didn't quite meet our own deadlines. The updated opinion was brought in January this year, so we're slightly late. We were quite keen to try to get it out as quickly as we could, but we want to make sure that it was effectively integrated and into the wider environment. So, for example, some of the details of the Online Safety Act weren't available until a bit later, so the code had to wait, essentially, for things to catch up. So we've got the opinion, an updated opinion in place. Now that's the ICO's expectations or ICO's guidance, our view. An opinion is something the commissioner can give to give indication of what they consider to be good practice and what we're expecting from services. So it is essentially similar to guidance. We're still learning We're still looking to see how age assurance updates and how the technology develops. And we're conscious that there's the ISO standards that are still under development as well. And there's currently the DPDI bill going through Parliament that will probably require changes to the core age-appropriate design code, children's code. So all of that's still to be done. So over the next 2 years, we will probably have to update this version of the Commissioner's opinion, probably sometime in 2025 or 2026. Once all the DPDI has gone through, we know all the requirements for the DPDI, we update the code, then we go back and potentially update the opinion, potentially into a guidance document that will link over to the ISO standards and so on. Okay, so that's probably how we're going to continue to keep this up to date. This is a summary of the changes that apply. And I'll try to go into a bit more detail if I've got time. I want to make sure there's enough time. So I won't do all the slides if we don't have time to do them. Last year, before we started the update, we changed our position on services that are likely to be accessed by children. So from 2020 to 2022, for example, the ICO's view was pornography service, for example, were not in scope of the Children's Code. A policy change happened that we said if a pornography service or any 18+ service, is likely to be accessed by a significant number of children, then they are in scope of the code, and they either have to prevent kids from accessing or apply standards of the code as 18+ services. Now, clearly, we don't want porn services applying the standards of the code. So there's also a proviso there that says if it's inappropriate for a service to have kids on in any circumstance, they should use age assurance to focus on preventing children's access. Okay, so those are the sort of things in the background that influence the ICO's view on age assurance. So we need to update the opinion because the original 2021 opinion was based on that sort of previous view on 18+ services. So that was the first thing. I mentioned the OSA. Those of you who've seen the Part 5 consultation process, we noticed that the Part 5 referred over to the ICO's Commissioner's opinion. The ICO is a statutory consultee for the Online Safety Act. So we're working with Ofcom to collaborate and join up the two regimes. Now we're conscious of lawfulness as one of the Article 5 principles. So lawfulness will also apply for the Online Safety Act, for example, when it comes to the application of age assurance. So we had to make sure that what was in the Online Safety Act was also reflected over in the Commissioner's opinion on age assurance. So we had to wait a bit, and then now, when we were rewriting the opinion, we shared it with Ofcom, and they kind of worked with us to get the language right. So the opinion now kind of shows what you need to do for data protection law and what you need to do for online safety law as well, one-stop shop. The update also includes an update on age assurance technology, so we have a better understanding of what the market can do, start to look at things a bit more like waterfall techniques and multiple techniques to improve accuracy. We have a very clear steer now that high-risk processing, that is high-risk, services that process children's data that are high-risk processing cannot rely on self-declaration alone as a sufficient form of age assurance. That's quite clearly now stated in the updated opinion. It was a bit fudged in the earlier 2021 version. And finally, the update uses what we call as must, should, could language. Services told us that they wanted more regulatory certainty. What do we have to do? What do we might have to do? What could we do? So the must, should, could, must relates to anything that's in the UK GDPR or PECR, right? So you have to do this, otherwise you're not legal. You're not processing data legally, okay? So that's the musts. The shoulds and the coulds of various levels of good practice and guidance. We think you should do something, or you might want to, you could do something. So that gives practitioners a better understanding of what their legal requirements are for age assurance as they relate to the GDPR. Okay. All right. I kind of covered most of this, so I'm just going to skip over that one, if I can. Okay, so, yep, I'll skip over that one as well to make sure we get time for questions. So here's where we talked about the significant number issue again. So likely to be excess was a critical reason for updating the code. Start again, sorry. The significant number again figure was it if you're likely to be accessed by a significant number of children. Some of the laws in Europe mention a numerical figure for whether or not a service is likely to fall within the DMA or DSA. We looked at that to try to give as much certainty as possible around likely to be accessed, but because the ICO regulates a wide part of the digital economy, it's impossible for us to do so while also making sure that something is relevant to risk. So you might have a small service that's very high risk processing. We want to make sure they were captured as well as the larger services as well. So there's no numbers in this likely to be accessed on purpose. There is guidance on what factors you might want to consider to make that the organization would likely be accessed by children. And these range from things like, do you have advertising that applies to kids? Is there any market research available? Is there gray research that shows children on your site? So the update covers that in more detail and links over to the more detailed guidance on significant and likely. It also goes into more detail about the methods. So we look a bit more about what the ICO considers important for age verification. Here we're looking at things that establish via hard identifiers when that might be appropriate, when it might not be appropriate. Age estimation, self-declaration, and waterfall techniques. Now, the waterfall techniques was the thing that we probably didn't have enough understanding of back in 2021. The more we talked to services, for example, they were this idea that you're giving a choice to users who might choose to go through an age estimation, or they might choose a telephone number check, or they might choose a hard identifier. Those are all good. Or if you start off with age estimation and then go down to age verification, depending on the level of risk and how certain you need to be. So we want to make sure that that sort of multi-factor or waterfall approach was in the updated opinion as it is now. We're really clear on the risk assessments about how it relates back to legislation. And these are the things that we are important to us. So high risk processing includes some of these things, right? Are you processing is a large scale profiling of children for advertising purposes, for example? Invisible processing. Are you targeting children for advertising? Are you tracking children, geolocation or even behavioral tracking online? Are you looking at their location, any sort of processing that will lead them to being physically at risk or developmentally at risk? Are you using innovative technologies such as AI that could present a risk to children? And then the catch-all in the DPIA guidance is, is your processing targeted at children? Then no matter you've got this, you are considered high risk because these are vulnerable individuals. So you should be doing a DPIA and you will be in scope of the code. Okay. All right. So the opinion advises organizations about when they have to implement age assurance methods, how they implement age assurance. So the various organizations, who's likely to be accessed, but also the compliance. So we give detailed guidance on that should approach against all the data protection principles. And this section from, I think it's section 6.1.3, and it relates to what Jenny said this morning in her talk about transparency, is in the transparency section. And this is the must. So the opinion clearly states you must make sure that your processing is fair, establish a lawful basis for your processing. You're transparent about how you use the information of the users. You're not using information collected for age assurance for other purposes, a must. You must collect the minimum amount of data. You must make sure your method is accurate. You must not retain information collected for this method longer than it's needed. You must not make sure the age assurance method is secure, and you must be sure that you're accountable in your compliance with the law. All of those are musts. All of those are based within the GDPR. Okay, that's a pretty clear thing. So when organizations are telling, well, I might wait for another couple of years before trying to put age assurance into place, you can refer them back to this and say, this is the law, the ICO is saying this is the law, and that if you don't do it now and you wait 3 years, there's nothing to stop the ICO from going back to 2024 or 2022 and saying, why didn't you have this in place at the time? Because you were required to do that by the law. Okay, so use the GDPR, it's really useful. The code will help you do that, or the opinion. Okay. Next steps, I think I've already kind of covered that. So we're still learning. We are coming place like this, but we're also working with Ofcom on the next steps of the Online Safety Act. So we're consulting with them on the Part 5. We'll consult with them on the Part 3 child access part of the OSA. We're also really keen to keep up to date on the technology. So for example, if we are to take some sort of regulatory action, we'll need to know what's possible at the time of the regulatory action, right? So tomorrow afternoon, for some reason it's not showing up on all the schedules. At 4:30 tomorrow, Ofcom and the ICO will be running a roundtable. And we're really encouraging the providers of age assurance to come to that, to tell us what is state of the art and what is highly effective. We want to continue to listen and to learn from the providers and from the relying parties about what's effective, to keep us up to date so we can put that into the next iteration of the guidance when we're ready. I think I'll stop there and give us a few minutes if there's any questions.
We might be all questioned out for the day.
Yeah, it's been a long day.
If that is the case, maybe people could do with some refreshments before the next talk. So thank you very much,
fine.
Michael. Cheers.